One of the most fascinating things about the medium of gaming is its sheer variety. There are a lot of things video games can aspire to be. They can be fun multiplayer party games, competitive shooters, intensive platformers. There is truly no end to what can be achieved and conveyed with video games. It's a big reason as to why gaming is easily my favorite entertainment medium. I just can't get into something like a TV show or a movie as much as a video game. I need that inner activity to keep me invested, even if it's as minor as in something like a visual novel where you just have to keep spamming A over and over. It sucks me into the world way more than just sitting around and seeing things unfold could ever possibly hope to achieve. With how much variety video games offer, I think it's pretty obvious that not every game is for everyone. We all have our own preferences. A design decision that could be seen as ingenious by one may come off as objectively flawed in the eyes of another. Your favorite video game franchise then is probably one that captures everything you love about this medium the best. There are countless answers to this question and none of them are wrong, but for me that series would have to be Final Fantasy. Final Fantasy as a series is far from perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but as a whole it does way more than enough for me to love it. Explaining why I adore Final Fantasy would be a ridiculous undertaking, so let's take it slowly, one step at a time, beginning with the very title that started it all, Final Fantasy 1. Developed by Square Enix, back then Squaresoft, for the original NES. Final Fantasy was released in Japan in 1987 and North America in 1990. The game came out to glowing review scores, sales, and would be the beginning of one of gaming's largest and most iconic franchises. Now that much I assume you all already knew, but now I believe it's time to talk about the game in question itself. Throughout the years, FF1 has received many versions, each with their own pros and cons. A discussion of FF1's various ports and re-releases isn't something I plan to go into today. I believe that topic is better served at its own separate video. So for now, I'll be purely focusing on the game's original NES version. Though it's worth noting that I did make sure to play through the game twice. One time on the unaltered English release from 1990, and another using a fan translation by Chaos Rush, aiming to more closely resemble the original script, as well as some general bug fixes. Most of the terminology and footage used in this video will be from said second playthrough. As always, full spoilers will be present, and also make sure to like, comment, subscribe, and ring the bell if you wanna, it really helps me out. But without further ado, let's waste no further time on formalities. This is Final Fantasy. The four elements of the world, earth, fire, water, and wind, maintained peace through their crystals which exist to power them, but over the years, four evil deities known as the Elemental Fiends came and corrupted the crystals, destroying their light, leaving only the darkness behind, and as a result of that, the world is currently in chaos. The wind stops, seas rage, fire spread, and earth decays. However, despite the predicament, the people remain hopeful. As the great sage Lucan prophesied, when darkness veils the world, the light warriors will appear. And in due time, four travelers arrive at the kingdom of Cornelia, each possessing a dark crystal shard colored after one of the elements. They soon learn that Sarah, the princess of Cornelia, was captured by Garland, a former royal knight who betrayed the kingdom and locked Sarah away at the Chaos Shrine. Soon enough though, our heroes managed to knock Garland down, saving Sarah in the process. As a sign of gratitude, the princess gives the Light Warriors their loot, and the king orders a bridge to be built north of Cornelia, allowing the four adventurers to properly set forth on their journey to restore the crystals and bring light back to the world. This here is a pretty simple beginning, and while nowadays it may seem like nothing special, I believe that at the time it was wonderfully subversive. Rescuing the princess and defeating the big bad guy was a cliche even back in 1987. It was basically just a textbook video game plotline. But while Final Fantasy does begin with this exact premise, saving the princess here is really only a minor stepping stone towards a much grander adventure. Where something like The Legend of Zelda or Dragon Quest would end, Final Fantasy is only beginning. And I believe the thing that truly makes this work is the moment when you first cross the bridge, and you are greeted to the proper title screen. This is the only place where the phrase Final Fantasy is ever shown in-game, accompanied by the credits. credits, not showing up at the end but the beginning. And not only does it support inspiring art of the 4 heroes overlooking Cornelia, but it is also backed up by the track that would go on to become the franchise's main theme, and rightfully so, it's incredible. Final Fantasy I is a pretty box-standard JRPG. You'll be traveling around an overworld in order to traverse between various locations, arriving at towns where you can talk to NPCs, buy items, equipment, and magic spells using gil, the games as currency, while perhaps even resting at the local inn to restore all of your HP and magic. This is actually one of the only few ways to save the game, though thankfully you can also buy items such as sleep bags, tents, and cottages, which basically act as wicker portable inns you can use in the overworld, allowing you to save and restoring some of your health. These will definitely come in handy, as for most of your playthrough, you're going to be traversing through various dungeons, fighting random encounters in turn-based battles while collecting gil and treasure along the way, usually leading up to an important key item, which is often guarded by some sort of boss. That right there is basically the entire game for ya. It really is nothing complicated whatsoever, and honestly, I do kinda like that. FF1 has a pretty elegant simplicity to it, which I always found admirable. The enemy encounter rate is pretty solid, not being too high nor too low, and the overall length of the journey is quite comfortable to boot. On my second playthrough where I never used my emulator's fast forward function, I was able to 100% complete the game in only around 18 hours, which for an RPG is really not much of a big deal. The game does definitely suffer from general slowness though, don't get me wrong. Stuff like movement and battle speeds are definitely on the sluggish side. FF1 does thankfully let you adjust the speed at which battle messages are shown, but still, if you wanna check the game out on NES, don't fret abusing the turbo function, it will save you some good hours. But even then, the game does suffer from somewhat blatant padding. For example, during the first couple of hours, you'll run into quite a few of these locked doors, which you will eventually be able to open using the Mystic Key. While there is definitely some gratification in finally unlocking these elusive doors and getting some pretty darn awesome treasure, it does also mean you'll need to make quite the tedious backtracking tour if you plan to fully complete the game, which includes having to go through the entire Marsh Cave dungeon a second time. Now that's definitely pretty tedious. But the worst example of padding here would have to be in the Cavern of Earth, where after defeating a mini-boss and acquiring the Star Ruby halfway through the dungeon, you'll have to walk all the way back outside, give the Star Ruby to a titan residing in a nearby cave, who will subsequently let you pass, allowing you to enter another cave, where you'll meet this random sage who will give you a rod, which will then allow you to go all the way back and continue the Cavern of Earth. Yeah, that right there is really bad design. Clearly only being here to squeeze the game for 25 more ever so precious minutes. While FF1 is very much lacking in story and character, it does definitely provide in world building. After leaving Cornelia, the game kinda just sets you out, letting you do whatever. For most of the runtime, you'll mostly be going on errands for some random townspeople in order to get whichever key items you need. On most occasions, you'll just sort of be stumbling upon the 4 crystals. While this does make FF1 a pretty unfocused experience, with it kinda just jumping you around from place to place, I do definitely think it still has its charm. The progression here is very satisfying, providing a lot of opportunity to do things out of order. Only an hour in, you get this boat from some pirates, allowing you to freely navigate through a lake, and after using dynamite to create a canal, your traversal options unlock even further. This then soon leads you to get a raft, letting you explore rivers, and eventually the legendary airship, allowing players to quickly traverse through the entire overworld with no fear of random encounters whatsoever. It's only now that you're able to explore the northern continents. However, the game is kind of an asshole here because most of these lands are covered with woods and desert, which the airship is unable to dock on, meaning you'll have to land away from town and walk the rest of the way on foot. And that's just humiliating. The world itself is kinda just a mishmash of a boatload of different fantasy tropes. FF1 clearly wears its influences on its sleeve, with the most obvious one being dungeon Dungeons and Dragons, which FF1 kinda just rips off at many points. What with things like the magic system and one of the enemies literally just being the Beholder, a monster from D&D. Of course, this was later changed and redesigned to the Evil Eye, because, you know, copyright. However, one thing Final Fantasy can claim to be wholly its own is the fantastic soundtrack. For my money, you can't compete with Nobuo Uematsu, an absolute legend in both the gaming and music industry. While this original soundtrack doesn't even come close to some of his later works, it is still way above average. I already went over how great the opening theme is, but other tracks such as the Prelude and Victory theme are also as iconic as they come. We got some great dungeon themes like the Sunken Shrine and Mount Golg. And the main theme as well is a definite standout, doing a great job capturing the hopeful, light-hearted sense of adventure the game carries. My only issues with the soundtrack don't really even have to do with the music itself, more so just how it's used here. Like, I was never a big fan of how the game had a dedicated menu theme. Honestly would have preferred to just continue listening to the theme of whichever area I was in. And the battle theme. Okay, don't get me wrong, this track is good, and definitely deserves to be as fondly remembered as it is, but man, it does get really tiring. For a game with 20 different songs, it's kinda annoying having to only hear one of them for 60% of the runtime, and it's the only battle theme. There's no boss theme or even a final boss theme, something that the original clunky-ass Dragon Quest had. This is pretty darn pathetic, but still, we've got some great 8-bit compositions here. Regardless of the game often being pretty derivative, I still believe it manages to mix together all of these cliches into a pretty believable universe. And it does this by not dumping everything on you at once. FF1 starts out pretty traditional, with kings, knights, and wizards galore. Eventually though, it starts mixing in some slightly wackier folks. You come across things like witches, pirates, elves, and gnomes, much more on the high fantasy scale. The game even throws a vampire at you, which is very much out of left field, but still somewhat in tone. After you get the airship however, it goes completely off the rails. What with the northern continent being so dissonant from the rest of the world, it has you encountering dragons, mermaids, fairies, dinosaurs, robots, culminating with the Sky People, an ancient race of humans who possessed high technological prowess, as you set off to restore the wind crystal in literal space. Yeah, it's quite the doozy alright. The story scenarios here aren't particularly amazing, but they're all still memorable in their own ways. You're assisted by some fun side characters such as Metoya the Witch and Dr. Rune, while facing off against minor villains like Astos, who cursed the elven prince into a coma and stole Matoya's crystal ball, rendering her blind. The writing generally has some nice personality, with magical reverse-picking brooms, fun menu text, and jolly dwarves, supporting the signature catchphrase Lally Ho. It's all very likable. There are even some fun Easter eggs, like how one of the graves in Elfheim belongs to Erdrick, a character from the Dragon Quest series. However, this is only in the original Western release. As in all other releases, this is actually Link's grave, referencing the Legend of Zelda instead. The overworld also has some pretty cool secrets, like how you can open a map by pressing select while holding B, and when on boat, if you hold A and press B 55 times, you'll be able to play a fun little game of 15 puzzle. No real reason for it to be here, but you know, it's neat. Around halfway through, the storytelling starts to reel a bit more into its lore. You eventually arrive at the Crescent Lake, wonder why they called it that. It is here where you'll meet Lucan, the man who prophesied the arrival of the Light Warriors, assisted by his 11 trusty wise sages mages. These guys basically act as the lore guides, explaining some things in more detail. It's here where you learn that the threat posed by the four fiends has actually been going on for quite a while, as every 200 years a fiend shows up to corrupt a crystal. It all started 400 years ago when Tiamat corrupted the wind crystal, followed by Kraken corrupting the water crystal and Lich corrupting the earth crystal. Merelith then was prophesied to arrive only 200 years from when this game takes place, but due to the heroes defeating Lich, she came to claim the fire crystal early. Because of so many of the crystals already being corrupt for so long, the game can really show just how much of a threat the fiends pose. Lich did dry most of Melmon's land, but he was quickly taken care of. However, the northern residents weren't as lucky. Kraken not only caused an entire shrine to sink, but without the water crystal, the local mermaids are put in danger of turning into sea foam, prompting some of them to jump to land in hopes of perhaps growing legs. And as is evident, some of them did succeed in that. I don't know how that works, but good for them, I guess. However, the mermaids definitely didn't have it as rough as the sky people, once a technologically advanced civilization brought to ruin by the deadly Tiamat, with all but a few of the remnants being scattered throughout the land, one of these being the airship used by the Light Warriors. The few remaining sky people now take solitary residence in Lufenia, being so reclusive from the rest of society to the point where they don't even speak the same language as them. You need the help of Dr. Une in order to even communicate with these guys. All of this and more is what's at stake for the rest of the world if the Light Warriors don't succeed. It's a nice way of increasing the stakes as you approach the end game. The world here is really nothing amazing, but for what it is, I do enjoy it. But with that out of the way, I believe it's time to delve deeper into the battle system. Starting the game, you're presented with 6 different jobs you can assign to your 4 party members, those being warrior, monk, thief, as well as the white, black and red mages. These jobs can never be swapped out after starting a game, making this choice a very important one. This is also the main reason I made sure to play through FF1 twice. Seeing as you only have 4 party members, it's impossible to use every job in a single playthrough. So now let's get into said jobs, why won't we? The warrior is your main man. It has by far the best defenses, and can also dish out very solid damage. Definitely a must-have job for any given playthrough. The thief is a speedy fighter with a high lock stat, making it ideal for sweeping enemies and running away from fights, even though running away from battles is already pretty easy as is. Yeah, the thief is honestly not that great, especially early on when its equipment pool is depressingly low. You're definitely far better off going with a monk, which specializes in punching stuff. Not only does that mean you won't really have to worry about maintaining its equipment, but by the end of the game, the job becomes easily the highest damage dealer on the field. At max level, it can literally one-shot the final boss, which is ridiculous. The white mage then is not very offensively capable, having relatively mediocre defenses to boot, but it can buy and use a variety of supportive white magic spells, letting it do things like healing the party and upgrading their defenses. Much like the warrior, the white mage is a must-have in my opinion. Its healing capabilities are second to none. The black mage is kinda the opposite of that. Don't get me wrong, it is even more glassy than the white variety, easily taken down with only a couple of hits, but instead of white magic, it can learn black magic, letting it dish out large amounts of damage and boost the party's offensive capabilities. And then finally we have the red mage, my personal favorite job, mostly just for how freaking dapper it is. Gameplay wise, it's kinda like a mix of the thief, black mage and white mage, being able to take some hits, deal out solid damage, as well as learn quite a variety of black and white magic. It doesn't specialize in anything in particular and can't even learn some of the best spells in the game, but the red mage is still great for rounding out a party, providing very solid support. Now the job system in FF1 is one I find to be a bit of a double-edged blade. Let's start with the positives. Of course, the system helps keep the game uniquely replayable, especially with taking the ability to have multiples of the same class into account. There are quite a few fun wacky builds you can cook up, all with unique pros and cons. For example, a party of warrior, thief, monk and black mage is definitely an interesting one. With that much firepower, you'll be able to obliterate pretty much anything you come across. However, the trade-off then is that it lacks much long-lasting stamina. When in dungeons, your only way of healing would be by using potions, of which you can only carry 99, and with them only healing for 30 HP, your numbers will be going down real quick. Most detrimental of all though is that if one of your party members were to perish, then the only way to revive them would be by going all the way back to a local town church. The only other thing that can revive fallen allies is white magic, which nobody in this party is capable of learning. It's basically a do or die team. Kill anything you may come across as quickly as possible. Now a party of a warrior accompanied by a white, black and red mage would have far better utility, being able to use a whole lot of magic. However, said magic is very limited, and that's because in FF1, instead of a traditional MP system, you have magic charges via D&D. Spells come in tiers, and each tier has their own number of uses, aka charges. Your spell charge capabilities increase along with you leveling up. Each character can also only learn 3 spells of any given tier, with some spells having multiple variations in it of themselves. Higher level versions are usually specified with either an Ara, Aga or Aja Adhanem. Each tier has 8 spells, 4 black and 4 white, so red mages should think carefully about which spells to fill those slots with, seeing as after somebody learns a spell, they will never be able to unlearn it. The magic system here is something I am just okay with. I definitely prefer a simple MP system over this, but I honestly don't mind it much. It is nice being able to use low level magic without sacrificing points for your high level magic, but in my opinion, MP is simply more convenient and straightforward. Due to having to purchase spells, a magic oriented party will also definitely be far more expensive to maintain than most. What with just how expensive most of the spells are. In FF1, you're mostly going to be grinding for cash rather than EXP. Just when you finally buy all of that magic you wanted to get, you'll be arriving at the next town that sells even more expensive spells. The price tags here can get pretty overwhelming. Even if by the end of a playthrough, you will doubtlessly be swimming in guild that won't have much use. Honestly though, I think that my biggest issue with the magic system here is that I don't see a lot of these spells really ever being useful. A sentiment which is more so applicable to the black magic. A lot of the white magic is admittedly pretty cool. You've got a bunch of ways to defend and heal comrades, including single and multi-target skills. It also supports the series of Dia spells, allowing you to damage undead enemies. These are pretty situationally useful, but still nice to have. Eventually, white mages even get holy, a pretty damn powerful attack that targets all foes. However, the main reason to have a white mage is definitely for its resurrection spells, including the ultimate white magic Arise, reviving a party member and fully restoring their HP. The only thing that kinda sucks about it is that for some reason, you can't use reviving abilities while in battle. There's nothing saying why you can't do it, you just can't. Deal with it. But then we get to the black spell selection, and yeah, I'm not the biggest fan of these. Now don't get me wrong, there are definitely some winners here, such as Temper and Haste, greatly helping by increasing physical attack power, but then you've also got 6, yes, count them, 6 different instant kill spells, all with their own unique attributes, because enough is never enough, I guess. And I'm sorry, but I just don't like using these. When playing RPGs, I rather keep RNG to a minimum, and these are all just way too luck dependent for their own good. And I have a similar mindset concerning spells that inflict status effects. Again, I'd rather just stay away from that ball pit. Now teleport is pretty nice, letting you return to previous floors in dungeons, but I mean, white mages get exit, allowing you to just straight up escape dungeons on the fly, which is definitely the far better utility of the two. Also, what's even the point of Saber? It increases the user's physical attack power, but only black mages can use it, and by the point you get the spell, you would never have any reason to physically attack with a black mage. The most useful tools in their arsenal are definitely the various damage dealing fire, thunder and blizzard spells, as well as eventually flare, the ultimate damage dealing black magic. A lot of the enemies here have unique elemental affinities. It's pretty simple. Fire is strong against on dead and ice enemies. Blizzard is useful against fire creatures, and Thunder deals strong damage to water things as well as machines. Magic in FF1 is very useful for taking care of big groups. Seeing as this game likes to throw a whole lot of enemies at you, a single battle can have you contending with up to 9 foes, and taking care of all of them one at a time can be pretty damn repetitive, especially when accounting for the wonky targeting system. When fighting multiple enemies, you can of course choose who to attack. However, if an enemy that was about to be attacked has already been dispatched by another party member, then instead of the attacker defaulting to another enemy, the attack just misses and the turn is wasted. This system is definitely pretty clunky, but honestly I do think it has its charm. Of course I wouldn't want every RPG to work like this, but as a one-off thing, I do think it's neat needing to more carefully consider who's going to be targeting who, as opposed to just always defaulting to the strongest enemy on the field. It also gives the multi-target magic more utility, as being able to damage every enemy with one attack can alleviate a lot of stress. Even if, personally speaking though, I don't really like using offensive magic in this game, mostly due to how non-consistent the values are. The damage distribution here is all over the place. One attack can deliver 182 damage, but then using the same spell on the same enemy may only result in 73 damage. As I've made clear, when playing these sorts of games I like to feel like I'm in control, so the randomness with the offensive spells here does kinda turn me off from them, even if, again, they are definitely still useful. Going back to the job system though, for my first playthrough I went with a party of warrior, monk, red mage and white mage. Personally I consider this to be the best overall setup in the game. Got big damage and solid utility all around. Seeing as all of the party members here are nameless self-inserts, I decided to do a tiny bit of actual role-playing in this role-playing game, naming these guys after some of my online friends, though there is a 4-character limit, so I did have to abbreviate in some places. Of course I was the red mage, with my pal Camino, also known as Paul, playing the monk, and longtime acquaintance Buster Corp being the white mage. As for the warrior though, it's a bit more interesting. You see, one of my favorite traditions in the Final Fantasy series is how every game has a character who is called Sid. It's one of those nice little things that kinda tie them all together in a way. However, the original Final Fantasy doesn't have anyone who is called Sid. The tradition technically started with Final Fantasy 2, so it was always a fun headcanon of mine that Sid was the name of the original Light Warrior, with every subsequent game in the series making sure to have a guy named Sid to honor the original hero's legacy. I literally cannot go through playing FF1 without naming the warrior Sid, which is evident seeing as I also did that on my second playthrough, where I took up white mage duty and together with Sid was assisted by 2 new members, a black mage and a thief. My body craftium was the black mage, and Yoshido, also known as Kiki, managed as the thief, because the asshole won't stop stealing wallets in FF14. This party setup was definitely not as effective as the first one, but still we didn't really have much issue. Now a wacky party might be necessary for some, because if you have a solid team, then FF1 is really not a difficult game whatsoever. Most of the bosses here, including the final one, are no issue at all once you've gotten enough buffs going. Heck, on my second playthrough, I was able to beat the final boss with a dead white mage, and it was still not much of a struggle. This is one of those games that kinda just gets easier and easier the longer it goes by. FF1 definitely starts out pretty rough, what with how often you'll be missing your attacks, but eventually it'll come back around and you'll be able to hit things a ridiculous amount of times. And not only does Gil become far less of an issue, but you'll also start getting some equipment that allows you to infinitely use spells, regardless of your class and regardless of whether you have said items equipped, making magic charge conservation far less of an issue. Also early on, you'll encounter a lot of enemies who'll be able to do things like poison you, petrify you, or potentially even instantly kill you. At face value, these suck, but by the end of the game, you'll already have equipment that resists most of that stuff, again letting you coast by far more comfortably. Speaking of, the inventory system is definitely another point of contention here. This is where a lot of the NES clunkery appears in, and oh boy is there a lot of it here. Storing regular items is not really much of an issue. Usable items do share space with key items, but you do have unlimited inventory space, being able to carry 99 of any of these, and there are barely any of these items in the game as it is. The only part here that's really annoying is that you can only buy one item at a time, so if you want to stock up on some antidotes and potions, you're going to be mashing A for quite a bit, doubtlessly bothering other customers waiting in line. Now equipment is where the real issues here lie. You see, each of the party members actually has their own inventory, with 4 slots for armor and 4 slots for weapons. This here is really annoying to manage. You can thankfully trade items in between party members, but having to constantly make sure that everyone has the proper space for whatever's needed is some very clunky design. Honestly, I'd say that out of everything, this is the aspect of FF1 that has aged the worst. And not helping matters is that the game completely lacks any sort of item or spell descriptions, meaning you'd be better off playing this game with internet access. And seeing as Final Fantasy is a very large series, coming across exactly what you're looking for should thankfully not be an issue whatsoever. There are other annoying things like that, such as the row system. Basically, the closer to the top of the screen a party member is, the more likely they are to be targeted by enemies, incentivizing you to sort your party by their defenses. It's a neat idea, but the issue is that every time a member either gets poisoned or dies, they'll be sent all the way to the back of the row after the battle, forcing you to manually return them to their proper position. And this is something that happens a lot. Speaking of NES clank though, the original release of this game is notably beyond glitchy, with some spells and equipment straight up not working as intended, but thankfully these are mostly fixable with fan hacks, of which FF1 has plenty. However, the hack I used for my second playthrough actually didn't fix one of the more useful exploits, that being the so-called Peninsula of Power. Basically, around halfway through the journey, you can arrive at an area on the overworld which has a random encounter pool intended for near the end game, meaning that if you can take the enemies here down, you'll be able to very easily rack up money and experience, and you know, stuff like that is at the very least neat. And on that note, I think that for NES standards, FF1 is pretty visually neat. Nothing mind-blowing but solid stuff. The overworld is colorful and everything has a clear distinct purpose, even if there are some annoying limitations, such as how treasure chests still appear opened after being looted. The battle phases are definitely where the visuals shine the brightest. Well, not literally, they are all accompanied by dark backdrops, which is sadly kind of a must what with the NES's color constraints. And for what it's worth, we do at the very least get to see the environment at the top. A bit of color is better than none of it. I also always found it charming how everything is neatly split into little boxes, providing some solid clarity as to what everything is about. The highlights here though are easily the enemy designs, all being wonderfully handcrafted by the legendary Yoshitaka Amano, the game's lead artist and one of my personal favorites in the industry. I'm aware that his art style isn't for everybody, but I personally adore it. It's so easy to get lost in these works, everything is so simple yet also so complex. And there is a lot of it too. How one person can pump out these many striking illustrations in such a short amount of time, I have no idea. He also drew the design that would become synonymous with the original Light Warrior. It's a bit on the messy side, what with the giant horns and weird hair, but I do like it overall. It kinda sucks that this design doesn't actually show up in the game itself, but I guess that drawing an 8-bit sprite of this would be kind of impossible. Thankfully, the player sprites we do have are all pretty great. For the standards of the time, these have quite a lot of detail, supporting unique sprites for when attacking, casting spells, walking and being close to death. There are even little things like how most of the weapons have unique physical appearances. It's all really nice, and designs such as the red, white and black mages are all really solid. However, sadly, not everything can be perfect forever. Eventually, the heroes arrive at the Cardian Islands, land of the dragons. Despite what you may think, these dragons are all actually actually pretty chill. This is less so a dungeon and more so a secret town, ruled by the one and only Bahamut. And man, how can you not love Bahamut? Definitely one of my personal favorite series mainstays. He's kinda just a generic dragon, but I always thought he was really cool, okay? He's involved in what is easily the most important side quest in FF1. Basically, Bahamut needs to be shown a proof of courage found at the nearby Citadel of Trials. Said proof of courage manifesting in the form of a rat tail. This is either a very clever analogy for something, or one of the designers working on some influence. With this in hand, the Light Warriors can properly confront Bahamut, who in return will bless them with brand new powered up jobs. The warrior becomes the knight, the thief becomes the ninja, the monk becomes the master, and the mages become wizards. The job upgrades mainly boil down to slightly increasing your stats, allowing characters to learn more magic and use a wider variety of equipment, even letting the warrior use some low-level white magic and the thief some low-level black magic. The monk gets jack shit though. Funnily enough, in the original NES version, due to a bug, all the job upgrade did to monk was lower its special defense. So if you have a team of 4 monks, it would actually be better not to upgrade to masters. These upgraded classes also result in the entire party receiving a complete visual makeover, and I honestly never liked how these sprites looked. They lack any of the personality the starting jobs have, turning them all into random buff dudes with tiny heads. A black mage should never be seen without its hat, it's just too cursed for me. But regardless, this whole thing is definitely worth doing. You can't really complain about a nice upgrade, even though I literally just did, but whatever. These enhancements will of course serve you well in the dungeons, of which FF1 has many, and these are all very much manageable. Most floors are on the small side, usually only containing 2 flights of stairs, making navigation relatively straightforward. Most of them do kinda blend in design-wise, but the game does throw in some new mechanics from time to time. Stuff like damaging floor tiles and teleportation pads. The dungeons here are also filled with chests containing treasure and gil. However, said chests are usually surrounded by trap tiles. When you step on these, you'll be locked into a difficult fixed encounter that you cannot run away from. It can definitely be annoying, but these can also be used to positive ends if you know what you're doing, allowing you to quickly defeat mini-bosses and rack up a ton of EXP, eventually allowing you to arrive at the max level, that being 50. I do honestly kinda wish that the treasure here was a bit more consistently useful though. Oftentimes you will find some genuinely useful equipment and quite a lot of gil to boot, but then other times you'll find only 10 gil, literal cloth on the second to last dungeon, or just some straight up empty chests. I get the point, the stuff you find is supposed to be a mystery, however I don't think that translates particularly well to game design. My favorite dungeon would probably be the Flying Fortress, a ginormous castle orbiting above the planet, filled with centuries-old ancient technology constructed by the Sky People, with one of these constructions being the single strongest regular enemy in the entire game, the Wormek. Rarely encountered in the dungeon's very last room, it might make you jump if you unintentionally run into it, but honestly, much like the rest of this game, I didn't find it to be all too difficult. Still though, a really cool opponent. Also in the Flying Fortress, you'll be able to find an adamantite, which when brought to this here dwarfsmith will allow him to craft the legendary Excalibur, one of the best weapons in the game, but not the best weapon. That honor belongs to the Masamune, which can be anticlimactically found in the final dungeon. It has the best stats out of anything and every job can equip it, making it pretty darn awesome. But alright, seeing as we're on that topic, I guess it's time to start wrapping things up, So, the 4 warriors have successfully restored the light of the 4 crystals. However, things haven't been fixed up just yet. You see, throughout the journey, there have been some slight implications hinting at an entity secretly controlling the 4 fiends, being the ultimate source of all of the destruction. In the Flying Fortress, you'll discover that the 4 crystals seem to be directing their energy into the Chaos Shrine, located in the dead center of the map. This leads the heroes to later revisit it, and it is here where they find 5 bats capable of speaking. You see, the Sky People sent 5 of their people to investigate the source of the fiends, but they ended up getting turned into bats, still residing in the Chaos Shrine to this day. They explained that with the power of the 4 crystal shards, the Light Warriors can travel to when all of the chaos apparently began, 2000 years in the past. I really like how the game comes around on itself, with the first dungeon also being the last. In order order to progress through the Chaos Shrine though, you have to use the loot received by Princess Sarah all the way back in the beginning of the game. It's been kinda just decaying in the inventory this whole time, waiting to be used in this exact moment. Not really sure what the point of that is, but whatever, I don't really care about it enough to complain. The rest of the dungeon is a pretty lengthy one, including rematches with far stronger versions of all 4 elemental fiends. After taking care of all of them, the warriors finally confront the mastermind behind everything, Garland, the knight who kidnapped Princess Sarah at the start of the game. Okay, so I have a lot of explaining to do here. You see, Garland was never actually defeated by the Light Warriors. Just as he was about to be taken care of, the 4 fiends rescued him by sending his body 2000 years back into the past. Then in the past, Garland created the 4 fiends and sent them to the future, allowing them to corrupt the crystals and send him back to the past after being defeated by the Light Warriors, thus creating a time loop where he can never die. This entire thing is so stupid, so contrived, so poorly explained, and I honestly kinda love it. The Final Fantasy series is sort of notorious for its occasional absurdity, and the fact that they put such a convoluted plot point in an NES game is very endearing to me. Garland himself is a pretty whatever villain. It is cool that he is both the first and last boss, what with the whole time loop gimmick, but other than that, he literally doesn't have any presence in the entire game, so that's kinda lame. The former knight transforms into his ultimate form, the literal manifestation of chaos itself, supporting an awesome design as always, but also being pretty darn easy and somewhat of an anticlimax, again as always. Eventually, chaos is finally taken down, and with the time loop broken, the entire world proceeds to literally disintegrate. The origins of the time loop are still a mystery, but seeing as it has been averted, the entire game technically never happened. With no recollection of their fates, the 4 warriors return to a timeline where the crystals were never corrupted to begin with. The Sky People are still prospering, Mermaid still living safely, and Garland still being a noble Cornelian knight. It's a bit of a shame that all of this is kinda just told to you, but I get it, hardware limitations. Despite everything being forgotten, we are reassured that the legend of the Light Warriors will live on in the hearts of the people. And because this game is from the 80s, it also goes on to congratulate you for beating it. It's kinda cheesy, but I guess this has its charm. And so the game ends with this fancy schmancy looking the end screen being animated right in front of you, concluding Final Fantasy. So, overall thoughts on FF1? Honestly, I think it's still a pretty damn solid old school RPG. Don't get me wrong, it is beyond dated, lacking many of the now standard features of later entries in the genre. But in all honesty, I did still have a good time going back and playing the original game. The gameplay loop here is still one I find to be enjoyable, supporting systems that do help in encouraging replayability. For such a simple title, the amount of customization you can have here is very cool, even for its own balanced as it may be at times. The game is still visually appealing and the music is still great. While the original Final Fantasy may not have much of its own identity when looking at it without the rest of the series in mind, it still manages to carve a nice believable fantasy world, with a story that, while being a bit ridiculous on occasion, is still semi-enjoyable, for as minimalistic as it is here. As a series' first entry, I think it could have wound up a whole lot worse than it did, and for that it earns my respect tenfold. When comparing it to other JRPGs from the time, such as the first Dragon Quest or God forbid Digital Devil Story, then I think that FF1 pretty clearly stands on top. Unless you're already a big fan of this franchise, I'd have a hard time recommending the NES version to you. As mentioned earlier, I will eventually go in depth as to what all of these titles' various re-releases entail, but off the top of my head, I'd personally recommend either the PSP or Pixel Remaster versions to those looking to play the game for the first time. They both provide far smoother experiences that I do think most people will enjoy, but hey, I can speak for everybody here. Still, at the end of the day, I think that Final Fantasy is a neat game. It doesn't do anything terribly amazing, but it also doesn't have any overly major flaws. It is a standard, nicely packed NES RPG. However, if you want something a little more intricate, then maybe Final Fantasy 2 is just what you're looking for. Though, let's be honest, it probably isn't. But that's a discussion for a later date. So until then, as always, have a good one.